On Sunday nights, we're in the book of Revelation. I don't even know the week we started, about 215 weeks ago, I think it is. One more, no. One more start. Sunday nights, we're in Revelation. Revelation, not revelations. It is the revelation of Jesus Christ to His people, His family, and God's revealing it to us because the word revelation, apocalypsis, means to take off the cover. And what we're trying to do is tie the book of Revelation with the book of Daniel. As a young preacher, I was just mystified by all of this, and I used to go around looking for a book that would straighten it all out. I wanted one book that would get everything straight. Well, there's not one book, but there are some books that are really good, and I want to share it with you, some of the things out of a book that I've got up here, and try to help you understand some things about the book of Revelation. We're talking about the beast of Revelation 13 and Revelation 17. Revelation 13, 13th chapter, and the 17th chapter. And of course, we know that the beast is, there in the 13th chapter, is a lion, a bear, and a leopard. And then there is a fourth beast. Now, Revelation 13 doesn't show you the fourth beast. Don't mistake this beast with the second beast of Revelation 13. There's a second beast, and that beast is the religious system that speaks for the Revelation 13, the first beast there in verse 2. The beast rises up out of the sea, and the sea, of course, originally was the Mediterranean Sea, and the beast was the Assyrian Babylonian Empire that had their borders and boundaries upon the sea. And then you had Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then the Roman Empire, and they had their boundaries upon this Mediterranean Sea, and that was the main sea of the world. Nobody knew anything about the Atlantic and the Pacific. Didn't know anything about that. They knew it went out there somewhere, and they thought it was a little, just a sea of some kind, and had a drop off there. This was the majority of the world. Go over a little further over to India, and then the Mongols up in Tibet and in Mongolia and over in China. And then you went over to the Strait of Gibraltar, where you leave the Mediterranean Sea, and you've got the tip of Africa on the south and the tip of Spain just a few miles across the Strait of Gibraltar. So to them, this was the world. That was it. Everything was encompassed there. Therefore, if the Bible says that the beast comes up out of the sea, or the Great Sea, they called it the Great Sea or the Mediterranean, that was the big main sea, the main body of water of all the world to the civilized people back in the days of Daniel and even in the days of Jesus. Now we're talking about this beast rising up, and there's a Babylonian lion, and there's a the lion. What did I do? Put Babylon. What am I doing? Persia, Greece. The Babylonian lion, the Persian bear, lion, yeah. And then the Grecian leopard or Greek leopard, and we've already gone through why they're called that. The lion was the most regal of all the empires. Babylon was, and the lion is the most regal of animals. The bear is the largest carnivore in the world, and the Persians had the largest armies of any nation that existed in the ancient world. And the Grecian leopard was just a killing machine in the jungle, and that's what Alexander the Great was. He could attack a huge army, and he could just eat it apart because of his military tactics. He knew how to do it. And that's what he did to the Persian bear. And the Persian bear just literally ran over Babylon. And then a beast rose up after that. You don't find the beast mentioned in Revelation 13, Because in Revelation 13, it's not mentioned, but who is ruling during Revelation 13? Rome. Rome is ruling. So Rome, we find over there in Daniel 7. Daniel 7, we find the same Babylonian lion, Persian bear, Grecian leopard, and we find the fourth beast. The fourth beast in Daniel 7 is the beast with iron teeth. And we've said that always the iron is equated with Rome because back in that day and time, they had no alloys. To come up with steel, you have to forge. You have to put various metals in a forge, and you have to heat them up together in metallurgy. And they didn't have that. So iron was the strongest of all metals. And it was iron that could break all the other kingdoms in pieces. And it was Rome that did exactly that. And Rome is equated as the beast with iron teeth. And remember, the iron, and in the ancient world, this amazes me. You can read about this in various books. I don't remember where I've read it. I read it several places. I may have read it out of McClintock and Strong. But there was a taboo on iron in the ancient world. It was considered a curse. That's amazing because iron's always equated with Rome. And these four beasts, we'll go ahead and add Rome here. The beast with iron teeth. Beast with iron teeth. Iron teeth. And then you have the equivalent, the same equivalent this is in the seventh chapter of Daniel, Daniel 7. And then in Daniel 2, you've got the image of Nebuchadnezzar in his dream that Daniel translates for Nebuchadnezzar. And you have in the image, it's an image with a head of gold. And then that equates with the Babylonian lion, not because we made that up, but because Daniel looks at Nebuchadnezzar and says, "Thou art that head of gold." I mean, that's a nice way to find out what the truth is. Daniel said so. So therefore, if this head of gold is Babylon, it follows suit that the Persian bear is equivalent to the breasts of silver. And then the Grecian leopard equates, as you go down, with the brass, the torso, the belly or the torso. I call it the torso. The belly and thighs, or torso of brass. And then the beast with iron teeth, that's Rome. That's the legs of iron. And if you'll notice, as you go down Nebuchadnezzar's image, the metals get less precious, but they get stronger. And that's why this empire whipped this empire, whipped this empire, whipped that empire. And that's the way it came down. Now, we're talking about what's going on in Daniel 7. And we see this beast like a lion, bear, and leopard in Revelation 13. And we see that same beast in Revelation 17. We find that the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. And a head was a capital city of an empire. Capital city. Now, I did several tapes on the capital cities of the empires. I'm not going to get into that. I'll just say that when John wrote the book of Revelation, in Revelation 17 is 96 AD, is approximately when John wrote the book of Revelation. And in 96 AD, the Bible says concerning these mountains or heads or capital cities that 5 are fallen one is. Well, the capital city at that time of the beast was Rome. So that's the beast that is. And then there's the seventh head yet to come from John's day. A seventh one. And then one that's never mentioned, there's an eighth, which will be of the seven. Well, the one that was to come, the Roman Empire was ruling then. The Roman Empire was ruling, and the seventh that was to come, or the seventh capital city, would be Rome in the sense. The Roman Empire was outlawed when Gratian and Numa, two of the emperors, refused to wear the robes of the high priest of the Roman Empire. And in the Roman Empire, they said the Caesars were the child of the sun. They were the sons of the sun god. And that's common in any old movie. They'll say, some Caesar will come out and he'll say, this is the god. They call the Caesars gods. And they'd say, this is the child of the sun, or this is the son of Zeus. This is the son of Jupiter. And they called them sons. And those were the sun gods. So, you had 5 are at the time John's writing, or 5 are fallen, 1 is. That's the Roman Empire. It was outlawed. And then the seventh head, when the Roman Empire was outlawed, it was reinstituted in the form of Roman Catholicism. And the head of Roman Catholicism, they kept the head or the capital city there at Rome. So the seventh would be Rome of Roman Catholicism. Or you might say Vatican City. That would be the seventh. Of course, Vatican City's in Rome. And that's the capital city. And there's an eighth which is to come. And people keep saying, what's the beast at the end of time? The beast is not at the end of time only. The beast has always been here since the garden. It's always been here. So the eighth, people want to know, what is the eighth? Look at it in Revelation 17. Then we'll get back to Daniel 7. Look at it here. And when you want to find the character of something, you find what it was founded on and what it was built upon. Look here in Revelation 17. Now the woman is the whore that sits upon many waters, and she sits on a scarlet-colored beast in verse 3, full of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns in verse 3. And 7 heads being capital cities. And then you go down here to verse 9. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And a mountain was a capital city. When you look up Mount in your McClintock and Strong, it'll tell you it's a capital city. So 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. God speaks of Babylon as being a mountain of pride there in the 51st chapter of Jeremiah. And then God says, I'm going to make you a burnt mountain. And he speaks of, in the 7th chapter of Daniel, he speaks of Babylon being given to the burning flame in verse 11. And then in the 8th chapter of Revelation, we see at the sounding of the, we'll get it here. The sounding of the 2nd trumpet, that there's a great mountain burning with fire. And then we see over in Revelation 17 that the 10 horns are converted by Christ, and the 10 horns being spiritual Israel, that they destroy the beast and eat her and burn her with fire in verse 16 of chapter 17. And then we see the smoke of her burning. She's utterly burned with fire in Revelation 18 and 8. And there's 2 Babylons. That's why the scripture says Babylon is fallen in verse 2 of 18. And in Isaiah 21 and 9, Babylon is fallen. And then you look at the burning of Babylon in verse 8, and you see the burning of Babylon in verse 9 in chapter 18. And it speaks of her burning, and all of the merchants of the earth, they sat back and they wailed at her burning. So when Babylon in verse 18 of chapter 17, is that great city that reigneth over the kings of the earth. Now it's not just Rome, because Rome is just an extension of Persia, Greek, Persia, and Babylon. So when people want to know what's this eighth, let's read it here. Let's read in verse 10. And of course, one of the heads is wounded to death. The deadly wound, when you go over there to chapter 13, verse 3, and I saw one of its heads as it were wounded to death, and its deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So therefore, when the deadly wound is healed, that's where the Roman Empire is outlawed. The sixth one is outlawed. It's reinstituted in the form of Roman Catholicism, the seventh, but there's an eighth to come. And look here in verse, let's read 10 and 11. And there are 7 kings. Now, kings are used here in the place of heads or mountains. The words are not always kings. It comes from the word kingdom, basilica or basileus, B-A-S-I-L-E-U-S. And basilica, B-A-S-I-L-I-C-A, basilica, and there are variations of these. You go and you look up the word rule, king, kingdom. All these are variations of the word basileus or basilica. When they say St. Peter's Basilica, they're saying St. Peter's kingdom. That's what they're saying. Now, look at the 8th, and then I'll get back to Daniel. And the beast, or let's look at 10. There are 7 kings, or 7 mountains, or 7 heads. 5 are fallen. John is writing in 96 AD, and then he says, one is. Well, the way you understand that, you get mathematical. The one that is or exists during John's writing was the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire lasted 500 years. And it's got about 400 more to go here. So, and the other is not yet come. And when it cometh, it must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, here, the Roman Empire was and it is not. Something that is not is something that is dead or something that dies. The beast that was and is not, that was Roman Empire. It came out of Greek, Persian, Babylon. It is not. Where was I? The beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, or it is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. Now, what is that 8th head? I don't know, but I'll tell you what we can figure on it being. It's going to have the character of the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Empire, the Grecian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Babylonian Empire. And the head of the Babylonian Empire was the city of Babylon. The head of the Persian Empire was the city of Babylon. Even though it's the same city, it's 2 different heads because it's 2 different beasts. And the head of the Grecian Empire was Babylon because Alexander the Great loved it that much. So you've got the 7th is Rome under Roman Catholicism. The 6th is the Roman Empire during the days John is writing because 5 are fallen. So the head that's fallen before, I said I wasn't going to do this, but the head that's fallen before Rome, the head before Rome, Roman Empire, was what? Greek. But what was the head? Babylon. Babylon was the capital city. And the head before that was Babylon. So, During John's time, you've got 5 are fallen. So prior to the Roman Empire, there are 5 heads, aren't there? 1, 2, 3, and you got 2 back here. And I am absolutely positive that Babel was the one before Babylon, because all the Babylonian Empire was founded in Babel. Every historian will agree to that. And I don't believe there's a head between Babel. Egypt was not a part of the beast. Don't try to get that in there. Assyria was coupled with Babylon. They're considered the same. So the only thing that you can come up with is Babel would be the second head. And the first head, a head was a capital city. The first place where people gathered together was in the garden to throw God out and establish their own little world, democracy, capitalism. So everything has to have the nature. The 8th has to have the nature of Babel and the tree in the garden. It has to have that nature. Whoever's heading up the tree worship or the let us make us a name worship. It's not everybody getting together. It's not everybody getting together and becoming Roman Catholics and counting rosary beads, doing Our Fathers and Hail Marys. That's not what it is.
You said again, you said the 8th has to have the what? Something about the garden and the nature of something.
Well, the 8th, you can trace the 8th head back to the 7th. That's Roman Catholicism. Back to the 6th, one is, that's the Roman Empire. And 5 are fallen during the writing of Revelation. So the 5 heads or 5 capital cities of the beast have to be before the Roman Empire, don't they? Yes. Have to be. So you got Rome is the 7th. Roman Catholicism is the 7th. And the head is at Rome. Roman Empire is the 6th. And the head is at Rome. The 5th head is at Babylon. That's the Grecian Empire. The 4th head is at Persia. They had their head at Babylon, their capital city. And the 3rd is Babel. So there's only 2 before these. Isn't that right? The only 2 heads before these right here. Without a doubt, Babel is one of those heads. And Babel was the reinstitution of the Garden of Eden. I believe the Garden of Eden is the first city where Adam and Eve and the devil got together and voted God out of their life. That's what capital cities do. They're filled with pride. When they said, let us make us a name, a capital city was called a mother. And Babylon is the mother of harlots. She was founded on pride or pride. Let us make us a name. That's pride, isn't it? And name is the word Shem, and it means an instruction or a doctrine. When you make up a doctrine, you make up whatever comforts you, and it's filled with pride and self, and that's what Eve did when God said, thou shalt not. She made up a doctrine of the tree, all that's in the world, John said, all in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life. I'm getting at the point. The 8th will have the character of the Roman. It'll have the character of the Roman Catholicism, Roman Empire, Greek, Persia, Babylon, Babel, and the garden. It has to have that character. And all you have to do is go back to Babel. Let us make us a name, pride. It'll be a doctrine that looks like God's prophet and God's doctrine, but it will oppose God, and it will be full of self, and it'll go after the tree, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, because Eve saw a tree that was good for food. It would fulfill the lust of the flesh. She saw a tree that was pleasant to the eye. It would fulfill the lust of the eye. And she saw a tree that would make her wise, and she could be proud. So the 8th has to be the world system that promotes self, another doctrine that opposes God, and it goes after things and stuff or money. And where is a system like that? Well, it is America. We're propagating that more than any nation of the world. It's all over the world. And we are the chief leaders in it by coming up with an evil system called democracy and capitalism. Democracy means a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's what it means. Demokratia. They had a government of Adam, by Eve, and for the devil, and they voted and threw God out. That is the meaning of the word diabolos, to cast out. That's one of the words devil, and the other word is D-A-I-M-O-N, and it means to distribute fortune. So when they distributed the fortunes of the tree, that's demon or capitalism. Capitalism has the same meaning as demon, to distribute. When you look up capitalism in Webster's, it'll say to distribute the wealth to the individual. Well, that's the same meaning as demon. And diabolos is when they cast God out. So I believe the eighth will be a system that tries to propagate a let us make us a name. And the word name is Shem, and Shem was God's prophet. So it'll have a name that sounds like God's prophet, Jesus. A prophet will God raise up unto you, him shall ye hear. So it will be a substitute, other Jesus, another Jesus, another Spirit, another gospel, 2 Corinthians 11 and 4. And it'll be a system of self and wealth and money and me and what I want. Boy, if that is not an American system, I don't know what is. I believe the eighth head. Now, I don't know if it's America exactly, but I believe we are a part of it. Whatever evolves in Europe and with the United Nations and China, nobody's going to solve this problem worldwide, because God said there'll be distress of nations with perplexity, and I will not. There'll be no cure when I get through with my judgments. But a man will rise up and claim to have the answers for the four judgments of God: the sword, the famine, the pestilence, and the beast. And it'll be the man leading the beast system that says he's got the answers for the sword, for war, for famine, for the economy, and for pestilence, for disease. And that's what they're trying to do now, isn't it? But God says they won't conquer it. So we're headed towards the eighth head. I would not doubt if it was not Washington, D.C. or New York City.
In addition to having the character of the beast, all the architecture and symbolism in all our capital cities.
It's all the same, isn't it? But the key is in men's hearts. That's the key. And they're preaching that gain is godliness, aren't they? They suppose that gain is godliness. That's what the world is preaching. I believe we live in the most wicked system that has ever existed on the face of the earth, and it's called the United States of America. Because don't they have a form of godliness? That's what the Bible says there in 2 Timothy, that they'll have a form of godliness, but they'll deny the power thereof at the end of time. They'll have a form, a morphe. Well, morphe is a shape. They'll have a Shem. They'll say, we believe in God's prophet Shem, but we got our own Shem, and we'll make up our own name, our own authority. We'll say Jesus, and we'll say born again, and we'll say all this, but we'll let everybody have whatever they want to have, and we'll tolerate and get along. We're headed towards... Folks, we are headed towards some of the scariest stuff I believe this world has ever seen. I sat and read out of one of my books, Osama's Revenge and Future Jihad, Friday night at the house, and it kind of scared some of us, didn't it? Huh? It's scary.
I like what you said about people being hypnotized.
Well, they are. They're mesmerized. The world is just, everybody's going around just, I'm a Christian, I love God. Now, let's get back over here to Daniel 7. Daniel 7. We see this lion, bear, and leopard. I'll come back and cover some things in this. I like Mr. Phillips on exploring the book of Daniel. I'm going to read some stuff, but I want to get on back with this. Daniel sees the four beasts rising out of the sea. The lion in verse 4, that's Babylon. The bear in verse 5. And then in verse 6, he sees the leopard and he sees the beast with iron teeth. And verse 7. And then he sees the little horn, and the beast has 10 horns, and that is the power of Israel. I've already gone through that. The 10 northern tribes brought in Baal and grove worship, tree and sun worship, and each one of those tribes was considered a horn. A horn was a strength or a power, and that is what corrupted Israel. It crept down into southern Judah after Ahab and Jezebel brought it in, and then God told Israel, if you're obedient to me, you are set up to conquer the world. Well, your disobedience, I'll take the nation from you and you'll submit to the world system that comes in to carry you away. And they gave up their sovereignty and their ability to conquer the world by disobedience to God and going after other gods. Then we went through this. We see that the 3 first horns were plucked up in verse 8. And not 3 of the 10 horns. The first horns was Babylon, Persia, Greece. And we already verified that they were horns in Zechariah, the 1st chapter, where the Bible says 4 horns carried Israel away into captivity. Well, that was Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. So the 3 horns that were plucked up was Babylon, Persia, Greece, and plucked up by this horn. Now, let me just remind you. Let me explain this so you can... It's hard to get all this at once. I said to the church this morning, you're missing a lot not coming on Sunday night. And because we're going through... I've told Mary this past week, I said, you know more about Daniel and Revelation than probably any preacher in Tennessee. You say, are you bragging upon yourself? No, I've studied this I've thoroughly got into this for 50 years. I started studying prophecy. I was a young preacher. I ran across some preachers preaching at it. 1963, 64. And that's when I started studying prophecy. I heard it as a kid in 49, 50, 51, 52. And I hear preachers preach at it, and I couldn't understand it. I'm going, I don't understand that. Well, they didn't either. But I've ran across a couple of theologians of sorts. All they did was challenge me to get going in it. About 1964, I just started jumping in and started digging out. Well, anyway... Now you're going to see here in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, you see the beast, and the whole purpose of the beast was to carry Israel into captivity and to be a correcting rod. That's what they were for. That's what the beast was for. Israel could have conquered the beast. Israel with just not a few thousand people, Israel with 2 people could have conquered the entire Roman Empire. If they had been obedient. Israel could have conquered all of the Assyrians. You say, how can they do that? Well, we found out how they could do it. We found out that God says, I've got an arsenal of lightning bolts in the sky. I've got 500 trillion lightning bolts in the sky. I'll use them if I need to. I got the entire earth down here that's sitting on a hot plate and it's boiling underneath. I'll raise that up and spew it on somebody when I get ready. All you need is to have a righteous king in Israel and a righteous prophet, and you're home free. And that's what he had with Isaiah and Hezekiah when the Assyrian Empire attacked Israel. And God sent the death angel Michael down to the camp one night and killed 185,000 of the Assyrians. And boy, the Assyrian Sennacherib got up the next morning and went, I can't fight this kind of God. And he took off back to Assyria. And 2 of his sons killed him when he got back. God has a way of whipping our enemies if we submit to Him. Now, Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. Daniel 7, Daniel sees. I want to show you something. Boy, Daniel sure is hard to understand if I wasn't explaining this to you, isn't it? Yeah. But it's really not. All you got to do is define a lot of words. The first half of Daniel 7... Daniel sees all these images, the 4 beasts, the 10 horns, the 1 little horn. That's the picture of the man of sin, who's the head of the world system, man of sin. And he sees the Ancient of Days, which is God. Ancient being in exact converse opposition to the four beasts, which are going to be temporary, and he's going to last forever, and his kingdom lasts forever. And then we see the demise of the beast, and then we get down in how that God's kingdom will be spread all throughout the world. And then the second half of Daniel 7, God explains to Daniel what this is. Daniel says, I don't understand that. And God said, let me explain. And then you get into Daniel 8, and you start with the ram with two horns. You start with the ram with two horns. Well, you're saying, boy, you get into that, you think, I can't understand that. What's so amazing about Daniel 8? He tells you exactly who it is. He names the two horns is the kings of Media and Persia. And then you see the little horn, and that overthrows the two-horned ram. And the reason it's a two-horned ram is because it's a dual kingdom. Persia was a dual empire. Persia, Mede Empire. Let me say this about the Persian and the Medes. Darius was a Mede. Cyrus was a Persian. But they were in the same empire. So, here is Iran right here. That is old ancient Persia. Here is Iraq. That's ancient Babylon. Here's the Euphrates River. Babylon was right there. Babylon was right here on the Euphrates River. And Babel was built on the same place on the Euphrates River. I think they're the same thing, right? Well, you have something over in northern Iran, which is ancient Persia. You have a section here, and these are called Kurds or Kurdistan. But Kurdistan doesn't have any boundaries on any maps. Kurdistan, they settled in these mountainous areas, and some of them will live over here in Turkey, and some will live up here in Armenia, and some down here in Iran, all in that area right there. And it's believed that the Kurds are Europeans that came down here, some of the white Anglo-Saxon Europeans that came down and settled in the northern section of what we call Iran. It's believed that the Kurds are possible descendants of the Medes. And these are Caucasian-looking Iranians. These people have got a lot going on over there. In fact, I talked to some Kurds down in at Farmer's Market. They've got the gyro sandwich place down there. They're Kurds. And I asked one of them, I said, do you have a king there? Do you have a king in position? He said, yes. We got a leader, a president or premier, but they don't have any boundaries. They just live here, over here. They're kind of like gypsies. They wander from place to place. Huh? They're nomadic people, yeah. But they have a government. How it works, I don't know. I tried to talk and get some information. It's hard to understand them. But I did some research myself. They're not sure, but they believe the Kurds come from the Medes. And that's a mixed people that come and live in northern section of Iran. Now, in this empire, in fact, I'll come back, but let me just read the first part of chapter 8. First part of chapter 8, and I got to finish up chapter 7, but I'll read down to this because I want you to see this. In verse 8, chapter 8, verse 1, in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. We'll look back at the first verse of chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Right? Now, Belshazzar, it says Belshazzar was king. He was, but he was associate king. He was what you call co-regent. His father Nabonidus was actually king, and he was off seeking refuge because he had come up with some other gods that he wanted to put up in the temple, and he was fighting for his gods and fighting the priests of Babylon over these gods, and they were seeking to destroy him. So he went and hid and left his heathen, evil, wicked Lucifer son Belshazzar in charge of the city of Babylon. Now, look here, and let me remind you one more time. Go back to the 5th chapter. 5th chapter. Verse 1. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. And Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't his immediate father. He wasn't even his grandfather. They called men who sat on the same throne father. And Nabonidus was his literal father, not Nebuchadnezzar. But you're not going to know this unless you know the culture. Which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem. Remember that? 2 Chronicles, the 36th chapter. When Nebuchadnezzar came in and carried away the vessels of the house of the Lord, and his princes and his wives and his concubines might drink therein. And of course he gets drunk and he sees the finger of the man's hand right on the wall, and he calls out Daniel and interpret this. And Daniel comes in and interprets the vision and says these words over here. Babylon did not speak the Hebrew language. It spoke the dialect of the Hebrew, the Aramaic. It was the eastern dialect of the Aramaic. And that's what these words, mene, tekel, upharsin, there in verse 25. Mene meaning to number the kingdom. Tekel means thou art weighed in the balances. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And then verse 29, then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be third ruler in the kingdom. Third ruler because Nabonidus was the king, Belshazzar was co-regent, but he was in charge, and Daniel would be third. But it doesn't matter that Daniel's third because Belshazzar only has that night to live. Because Cyrus is at the door marching down the dried up riverbed where he had diverted the river out into the Saudi Arabian desert. In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain. Now, let me explain something to you. It was Cyrus that came in and overthrew Babylon. Most of the writers will tell you. The next verse says, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. But you need to separate verse 30 from 31, and most of the writers say, put 31 as the first verse of chapter 6. Because it was Cyrus that overthrew the kingdom, not Darius. And it looks like here there's a separation of time. But I want you to notice, just because it says in Darius the Mede took the kingdom, you see it was Cyrus that overthrew Babylon in the last chapter, 36th chapter of 2 Chronicles, and in the first chapter of Ezra. And it was Cyrus that gave the first decree to go and rebuild the temple. So, and Darius the Mede took the kingdom. Well, that belongs down here in chapter 6. Now, notice, everything is not necessarily in chronological order. And I said this morning, chapter, C-H-A-P-T-E-R, number 6, that's not in the text. Notice he's dying in the 5th chapter, yet we're talking about the first year of Belshazzar in chapter 7, verse 1, right? We're talking about the second year of Belshazzar, the third year of Belshazzar in chapter 8, verse 1. So 7 and 8 belong in the text before chapter 5. Right? And you say, well, that don't make any sense. Well, yeah, it does. You talk like that. You'll say, You'll be talking along in a conversation, and then you'll start talking about something that happened in this conversation that happened before the things in this conversation happened, and you refer back over here. We do the same thing. I want you to see that. I want you to notice. So 7 and 8 belong before chapter 5. In chapter 6 belongs a long time, belongs sometime after. There's 2 other kings reigned before Darius. So don't think that everything is in exact chronological order. It's like, who was it? Oh, can't think of his name. But one of the great writers said, he'll give you enough, the Bible will give you enough history that you need to understand the Scriptures. But it's not going to tell you every king that reigned exactly when all these things happened. Now, let's go back over here to chapter 8. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar. Well, that certainly has to happen before he died, doesn't it? He wasn't resurrected from the dead for this to happen. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw that I was in Shushan, in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, I saw in a vision, and I was by the river Ulai. Now here's Daniel standing by this river, and he says, I'm looking at this vision. He saw a vision in the first half of chapter 7. And I'm going to tie these things together and read a little out of each chapter. Look back at verse 15 of chapter 7. I'm not trying to confuse you, but I want to try to measure this out as we go. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. What visions is he talking about in verse 15? No. He's talking about the visions he's had previously in that same chapter. You need to divide chapter 7 up from chapter 7, 1 verse through 14. That's his vision. He's seeing the beast. Look at verse 2 of chapter 7. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night 4 beasts. And he says in verse 15, I'm troubled by this vision. What are these beasts? What are these 4 beasts? Well, let's read a little bit of chapter 7, 15. He said, visions in my head troubled me, and I came near unto one of them that stood by. Now, every time Daniel is informed of what's going on, it's always Gabriel that comes to him. This is in all probability Gabriel. I don't know who else it would be. One is what Gabriel is called. Unto one of them that stood by, and asked him the truth of this vision that I had. Stop and pay attention to what's being said. And when he said, I'm troubled by these visions of my head, look previously in the chapter and find out the visions he's talking about. You see what I'm saying? It's not as hard as you think. If you say, what visions? Well, look back and see if the word vision is anywhere previously in the chapter. Right? And I came near unto one of them that stood by, and asked him the truth of all this vision. The vision is from 1 through 14. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things. These great beasts, which are 4 kings. Well, like I said, king, sometimes it's referred to as a king, sometimes as the beast or the heads of the beast. Don't try to be so technical that you're not going to find the answers. By king, sometimes the beast, the heads of the beast was called kings. But it doesn't mean it's the Caesars. Which shall arise out of the earth, and the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Well, that's real key there. You look at the kingdom that's forever and ever in Daniel 2, and that's Israel, or the church. And you look at the kingdom over in 145:13 of Psalms, and that's a kingdom that's forever and ever. And kingdom of God is the kingdom that's forever and ever. Then he says in verse 19, I would know the truth of the 4th beast. That's Rome, isn't it? So he's asking Gabriel, I want to know the truth about this 4th beast. That's the beast with iron teeth of verse 7, isn't it? Huh? which was diverse from the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron. There it is. Teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And he goes down through the 10 horns. Let's go back over here to chapter 8. Let me just show you some things. As this comes to me, I'm going to kind of share it with you. So Daniel is out by this river, Ulai. In verse 3, then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns. Notice this. Here's this river running along. And Daniel's looking out here. And he's seeing a vision out here by this river. And here's this ram stands up with 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high. But one was higher than the other. And the higher came up last. The higher horn was Persia. The lesser horn was the Medes. But they incorporated together and became one empire. And I saw the ram pushing westward. Well, I guess so. The ram is Persia, is what we call Iran. Pushing westward to go over here and conquer Babylon, to conquer the world over here, right? That's what they're doing. They're over here in the east. Everything east is Persia, and they're coming westward and going to... And now Persia is called a bear in the first part of chapter 7. It's called a ram here. On all of their cylinders, they had rams. The king wore a ram's hat in Persia. So you can't always have this. God will show us how various things are depicted, and there won't be a one depiction. Sometimes you'll have Persia called a ram, sometimes it's called a bear, depending on the context and what they're trying to get over. And the reason they're depicting it as a ram here, because they want to show the 2 horns. Let's read a little of this. And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward. It's going to go over here and conquer all these nations here and down to Egypt and up here and all these. It's going to conquer everywhere in the world that it can. And that so that no beast might stand before him. No empires are going to stand before the Persian ram here. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth. I wonder who that is. Here's the west. That's Alexander the Great rising up. And I'm brilliant. That's the reason I know that. No. The main reason I know that is, well, I'll read a little. It'll tell you that. It'll tell you. And I was considering, behold, a he-goat from the west on the face of the earth and touched not the ground. Now, what that means, he was moving fast. He was like a running goat. He's leaping in the air. Alexander the Great's army was like something you'd never seen before. Moved fast. And he was a great, great conqueror. What is that thing he called that? They had I saw it again on the other night on TV. I can't remember what they called it. They would take a big square of soldiers. It had a proper name. Does anybody remember that? Phalanx. Yeah, phalanx. Yeah, it was called a phalanx. Phalynx. Phalynx. A phalanx. And this phalanx, they'd have all these spears sticking out this way. And then when they come from this direction, they had all these real long spears like that. And they'd take this phalanx. And they would just literally march into that huge Persian army. Just march into it. And you couldn't march into those spears. You'd die going into the spears. And they showed him they showed some tactics that he used. And he come in with that phalanx and nobody would move. When you fell out, men from the middle would move out to that edge of that phalanx. And they just literally would march into the Persian army and start slaughtering them. They couldn't get into them. This guy was brilliant. The ideas he came up with. And he doesn't touch the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Alexander the Great. And he came to the ram, or that had two horns, Persia, Greece, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran into him in the fury of his power, with his phalanx and a lot of other tactics. They've got a computer-generated picture of his army on Military Channel. I've seen it a couple of times. And he's marching into the Persian army, and he does some of the weirdest things. They're going, what's he doing? He did one thing. He had these phalanx setting out here, and he took off running towards their army, and just all of a sudden took off sideways and took a bunch of horses going sideways. And what they did was caused a certain number of these, the Xerxes army, they'd have them, what are they doing? That's the craziest thing I ever seen. And here's the Persian army, and they'd take off a bunch of them running, and all of a sudden they'd just go sideways like that. And throw them completely, just kind of scramble their brain. And when they did that, they'd have a line of horses going this way, and they couldn't see over the horses, and they'd have a line of all of these slings, these guys with slings here, and they'd send a group of them to chase them out here, and they'd get out here somewhere, and they'd open the way, and those slingmen go knocking them off the horses. Just, this guy, he didn't fight fair. You had no idea what he was going to do next. They said he was 26 years old when he was out there conquering Persia. Just had the wildest ideas of anybody. They'd go, what's that? They can't whip us coming into us. And he did these wild things like that. And he was this little goat, not touching the ground. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler. The word is marar, M-A-R-A-R. M-A-R-A-R. It comes from that word mirah, M-I-R-A-H. Mirah. It means bitter. That's where Mary gets her name. Mary, meaning bitter. And that's the same word used when Naomi was bitter. She said, I am bitter now. And then he moved with choler against him with bitterness, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns, or broke, Median Persia, and there was no power in the ram to stand before Alexander, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great when he was strong, and the great horn was broken. And for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of the heaven. For the little horn. What's that? That's his four generals. Back to, this is why I'm reading this together with chapter 7. Chapter 7, verse 6. Here's Alexander the Great, the leopard. Verse 6. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, and the leopard overthrows the Persian bear, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. That's the 4 heads when Alexander the Great died. The 4 winds of the heaven, Cassander, Lysachamus, Lysachachimus, Seleucus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, Ptolemy, Ptolemy. And these are 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the 4 generals that took over Alexander the Great's empire. And you see those 4 generals in 7 and verse 6. And you see them right here. Where am I? Verse 9. Oh, 4 notable ones in verse 8. Toward the 4 winds of the heaven. And that's And these took over Alexander's empire. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. Now I want you to notice. In chapter 7, you have the little horn that is a picture of the man of sin, or the head of the beast. And we say Pontifex Maximus. It'll be whoever's head of the world system of let us make us a name or self, man of sin. But this is in the 8th chapter. It's talking about the demise of Alexander the Great. And out of these come 4 generals. And out of Seleucus come the different Antiochus. You have Antiochus the Great. Then the Great that comes out of Seleucus. And Seleucus is the Syrians here. Remember I said that as one empire is ruling, you got a bubbling, like you got a big cauldron, you got one big bubble, that's like the picture of the empire. You got other little bubbles all over the place, and the little bubbles are trying to grow into the big bubble so they can conquer and be the world empire. Well, you had 4 men like that wanted to be head of the world empire. There's only one problem. You had Rome rising up over here, the beast with iron teeth. And they could not subdue Rome, but they were acting like little tyrants within themselves. They were little tyrants, and the worst of them was Seleucus. And out of Seleucus would come these different Antiochus characters. The first Antiochus, there was many Seleucians. Seleucus was the man's last name, just like Julius Caesar. So after Julius Caesar, they called all of them Caesars, didn't they? Caesars. That's kind of like, instead of calling it President of the United States, they should have called them Washingtons. That's what they would have done in the ancient world. So they called them Seleucians. Now, getting into all of the Seleucians is very difficult. Getting into the different Antiochus, I'll just say this. Antiochus the Great, when he fell, his son arose. He was called Antiochus the God, or Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes, he is the Old Testament picture of the man of sin. Man of sin. Now, there is a man of sin that will rise up during the 70th week of Daniel's 70 weeks, and I'm not going to go into that right now. The 70th week, and he will, for 3.5 years, or what the Bible calls a time, times, and half a times, or what the Bible calls 42 months, that's exactly half of 7 years, or what's called 1,260 days. That's half of 7 years on a 360-day Jewish calendar. Now, there's a man of sin that will rise up. Daniel 7, when it talks about the little horn, it's talking about the man of sin of all time. It's an office. Man of sin. And Daniel 8, this is Daniel 7. And Daniel 8, when you get to the little horn, you got a little horn in Daniel 8. That's talking about the picture of the man of sin as spoken of by Daniel the prophet. The abomination that makes desolate. Anytime you see that, the abomination that makes desolate, that is where Antiochus Epiphanes is mentioned in Daniel, the 8th chapter. This is the desolation. This is the abomination that makes desolate. And we find this Antiochus Epiphanes in Daniel 11. He pollutes the temple of God. He pollutes the temple in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem. There's a spiritual Jerusalem that at the end of time, the little horn that's the man of sin will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease during the last half of the 70th week of Daniel's 70 weeks. I'm just simply showing you that Daniel 7, you've got a vision in the first part of the chapter, and you got a little horn in that vision. Then God explains the little horn to Daniel in the last half of the chapter. And then chapter 8, you've got Persia being overthrown by Alexander the Great, and you got a little horn there that rises up, which is Antiochus Epiphanes. Let's go back and read that. Look here. Daniel 8. All right, now, let's read 9 again. Out of one of the four, look at this. The great horn was broken. That's Alexander the Great in verse 8. And for it, or for the little horn of the goat, came up four notable ones. That's the four generals that take over Alexander the Great's empire toward the four winds of heaven. And out of one of them, out of Seleucus, one of them will come forth a little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes. Chapter 8 is talking about the literal man. It's talking about the office of the man of sin in chapter 7. Can you see that? Now let me continue reading. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, that's Antiochus Epiphanes, which waxed. He didn't come out immediately. There's several solutions are going to reign, and a couple of Antiochus before you get to Antiochus the God. I mean, it's what you call a taxis. A fixed succession of kings, just like Jesus is a priest forever after the order, taxis, a fixed succession of priests. Melchizedek it's an order. And out of one of them came forth a little horn which waxed exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. Antiochus Epiphanes, he's trying to take over. He's up here. He's taking over everything in this direction. He's trying to. And he goes and takes over Tyre. And he takes over Egypt in the south. He's trying to take Egypt in the south. And he's trying to take the pleasant land, Israel. The pleasant land is Israel. This is allegorical language. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. This is allegorical language of how he destroys Israel. For at least 2 years, the temple was desecrated, and it was Judas Maccabeus that came along and liberated Israel. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. We know who did that in the Old Testament, Antiochus Epiphanes. See, we're getting into an explanation of this. You say, how do you know this is everything that you're saying? Well, let's read this next verse, and then I'll show you. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Didn't Antiochus Epiphanes raise up He raised up in the temple of God when he was going to attack Egypt, and the Roman emissary came down and met him here on Cyprus and drew a circle around him and said, do not get out of this circle until you promise you're not going to attack the Ptolemies of Egypt. And he had heard that there was a rumor that he had died in Israel And they were rejoicing all over Israel. And he said, I'll get them. I am so mad. I'll do something. So he goes into Israel and he starts killing Jews. And he actually starts checking everybody. And if they're circumcised, he'll kill them unless they're willing to become Hellenistic in their beliefs and go along with him and with his raising up an Ashtaroth in the temple and offering a swine on the altar of God in the temple. And that actually make a man disrobe to see if he's circumcised, and if he was, and he was a Jew, and you wouldn't relinquish all your rights in Israel and follow Seleucus or Antiochus, you're dead right there on the spot. They'd kill you. So he attacked the people of God. And that's all explained in the 11th chapter of Daniel. Now let's get back here. Now, you say, how do you know this is what's going on? Look back up here go back over here. Well, let's look down here in, I don't want to comment on the 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. I'll just say that they believed it was 2,300 days from the time that the priest in the temple of God in Jerusalem, from the time that he consented to offer these sacrifices for Antiochus till Judas Maccabeus. It was 2,300 days, it's believed, until Judas Maccabeus liberated Israel several years later. Now, let's, where was I? Well, let's read 13. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the visions concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? Well, this is talking about Antiochus. I've got all kinds of commentaries. Nobody knows exactly how long the temple was trodden down. And they don't know exactly when the 2,300 days began. And exactly, we do know that it ended with Judas Maccabeus cleansing the temple, and that's called the Feast of Dedication. And we know that happened several years later, around 162 BC, when the temple was cleansed. Then shall the temple be cleansed. And we're not really exactly sure when they began, but we do know that this is about the abomination of the temple over there in the Old Testament. Let me just give you one thing on this. Hold your place there and turn to Matthew 24. Matthew 24, where the people say, they want to show Jesus the temple, and they ask, and he says, the time will come where one stone will not be left upon another, that won't be cast down. It was such a magnificent place, they couldn't imagine that happening till the end of time. In verse 3, as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And Jesus talks about, take heed that no man deceive you. Many will come saying, I'm Christ, and deceive many. Wars and rumors of wars, nation rise against nation. You'll be delivered and afflicted. The love of many waxing cold, false prophets arise. And then he gets up here to verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Well, what he's talking about is Daniel the 8th chapter, Daniel the 11th chapter, and several other verses here that point to that. Well, that's what this is talking about here, isn't it? It has to be an abomination. It has to stink in the nostrils of God. Now, let's keep reading. And it came to pass when I, Daniel, verse 15, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning. Here he is. Now remember, in chapter 7, he's wanting to know what all this means. Remember that? Chapter 7, verse 15. He said, I was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and visions of my head troubled me. In verse 15 of chapter 7. It's not like Daniel was brilliant and could understand it without somebody explaining it. And he had an angel explaining it to him. He had Gabriel. And the reason this is probably Gabriel, because he says that who it is here in chapter 8. So it probably Gabriel in chapter 7. He calls him one unto one of them that stood by in verse 16 of chapter 7, right? Now let's look at verse 15. And it came to pass, when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, here he is, verse 15 equates with verse 15 of chapter 7. They happen to be the same verse in both chapters. He's looking for the meaning in verse 15 of chapter 7 of the first vision, and he's looking for the meaning of the second vision in verse 15 of chapter 8, isn't he? It's really makes it easier to see. And when it came to pass, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel. How's that? Make this man understand the vision. Well, it's Gabriel here, and I'm quite sure that in verse 16, I came near one of them that stood by. It's Gabriel there. And Gabriel is the announcing angel. It was Gabriel about the time of the evening oblation in the next chapter, chapter 9, that comes and relates the 70 weeks of Daniel, 24 through 27. And remember, Daniel is over in Babylon. He's over here. He's been carried captive in the last deportation. All right, where am I? And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, tell this man what this means. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep, on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. Whoo-wee. Man, Gabriel is going, sit up here, boy. I would be scared out of my mind. Stop and think of what's happening here. You're seeing this vision. Daniel says, I don't understand. God says, Gabriel, show him. Daniel touches him, sets him up, says, sit up here and listen to me. Boy, wouldn't that be an assurance that you belong to God? Wouldn't that be great? I wouldn't mind God scaring me to death so I could know that. Would you? Whoo-wee. And he came near where I stood, and came, and I was afraid and fell upon my face. He said, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall the vision. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep, and my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, this is Gabriel talking to Daniel. Just like Gabriel announced to Mary she was going to have a child. He's going to be virgin born, just like he talked to Daniel. Gabriel is God's announcing angel. And he said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. At the very end of the abomination. It's not simply talking about Antiochus, but at the end of all of this. Or the end of the beast. Not at the end of the Old Testament. For at the time appointed, the end shall be. How's that for sovereignty of God? Now, how did I know who all this was? It's real easy when you get to verse 20. Y'all thought I was a great seer when I started telling you. See, I read through the chapter, and then it's real easy. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. See, that's not a guess, is it? And the rough goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king of Greece. Now Alexander wasn't the first king of Greece. Philip the second was his father. But he was the first one in the Bible that is of any significance. And he was the first king of a world empire of Greece. He's the one that overthrew the bear. So he's the first one in that sense. And this is Alexander. There ain't no doubt about that. So he's the first one as a world empire. Philip never accomplished that. Now, that being broken, or Alexander the Great, this is the horn that was broken. Remember that? Over there in verse... wait a minute. The horn is broken up here in verse 9. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, but waxed great exceedingly, moved towards the east and toward the west. Wait, let me see here. No, wait, that's the little horn. Wait a minute. The great horn comes out between his eyes. That's Alexander the Great in verse 8. The great horn was broken. And it's called a little horn previous in the chapter. So verse 22, now that being broken, or Alexander the Great from verse 21 is broken, whereas four stood up for it. There it is again, isn't it? Yeah. 7 in verse 6 and 8 and verse, where's the 4? Oh, verse 8. 8 in verse 8. 4 notable ones towards the four winds of heaven stood up for the great horn. So he's explaining the great horn or the little horn that overthrows Greece. The rough goat is the king of Greece and so forth. Verse 22, now that being broken, or Alexander the Great being broken, wherefore his four generals stood up for him. 4 kingdoms shall stand out of the nation, but not in Alexander the Great's power. They will be individual kings themselves. Now, verse 23, we jump all the way to the end of time. Between verse 22 and 23, in the latter time of their kingdom. What is their kingdom referring to? Alexander the Great's, the 4 generals, Media and Persia, which is also Babylon. The latter end of their kingdom would be the latter end of the beast, wouldn't it? It would go all the way to the end of time. The latter end of their kingdom certainly is the 8th. Go all the way to the 8th. The 8th head at the end of time. Now, in the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full. In other words, when all transgression is finished in the eyes of God, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Now somebody's going to claim to have the answer for world problems. And what are the dark sentences that he's going to have the answers for? The word dark sentences is the word Chidah. C-H-I-Y-D-A-H. C-H-I-Y-D-A-H. It means puzzling questions. Now, what is the questions at the end of the world system that needs to be answered? And this king of fierce countenance, who is this king of fierce countenance? He's the same thing as the little horn of chapter 7. He's the man of sin. But the man of sin has to be revealed, has to be exposed there in 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter. And it'll only be at the end of time when he's exposed. So he's going to have it means puzzling questions, hard questions. It comes from a word that means to tie in a knot or a riddle. What are the riddles that the world has got a problem with? The 4 judgments of God, the sword, the famine, the pestilence, and the beast. We have got so much disease going throughout the world. We got so much so much war. We can't even declare war. We don't know how to declare war. We don't even know what's going on. I was brought out again Friday night how that the first of last year there were 3 Israeli jets when Mr. Ahmadinejad said that he's going, when he gets nuclear power, he's going to blow Israel off the face of the earth. And Israel believes that. And Netanyahu, when he was on TV one night, he said, we don't have, he told Glenn Beck, and Netanyahu is a very smart man, educated in America. He was the premier of Israel. He said, we only got about a couple of years. He said that about a year ago. Before, he said, a couple of years before they come up with nuclear power and before they come over here and want to attack Israel, blow them up. Well, Israel is already a world nuclear power. It's a first-rate world nuclear power. That's why all these nations are afraid, and they don't just come in and attack Israel. They'll skirmish and have little wars and battles with them, but they don't want to get serious enough to all of them go and attack, because Israel is going to make a moonscape out of all this with all of their nuclear power. So Israel, we don't even know how to fight. It's crazy. Israel is our ally. And last year, we control all the airspace over Iraq and all this area up here. We control the airspace, and Israel sent 3 of their Mystère jets. I believe they're Mystère. There's French jobs, and they were flying over Iraq, and each one of them had a 20-kiloton bomb on board, and they were going to blow up Mr. Ahmadinejad. And our planes told them to turn back. The U.S. jets that were guarding the airspace, that was against international law, and we turned them back and we told Israel that we was going to shoot them down. We don't even know how to deal with our own friends. It's crazy. We don't know how to fight wars. We can't attack Korea. Korea's got China and Russia backing them. So if we attack Korea, then we're taking on Russia and China. And China's got a couple of billion people. They got 200,000. Not 200,000. They got an army of like 2 million people. No, 10 million, excuse me. They got an army like we ain't never seen.
There's an article from Russia on MSNBC saying that they'll use nuclear to protect their friends.
Yeah, they will. I mean, we can't. And you got this nation trading with this nation, and we're selling to this nation. And if we attack this nation, they're going to stop selling the goods that we sell to this nation up here to over here, and all kinds of embargoes and all kinds of sanctions going on nations. And we have distress of nations with perplexity. But there's a man rising up, the king of fierce countenance, and he's the little horn of Daniel 7. He says, I got the answers. My name's Bill Clinton. I'll tell you what. It's going to be somebody not unlike Bill Clinton. Or him and his wife, yeah. All right. And I don't know how this thing will finally evolve. I don't know. How much time do I have, Mike? 6. Gosh, I need more money, more time than that. More money than that. Okay. And look at verse 24. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully. And shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Now this is talking about it's certainly talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, but it's also talking about at the end of their kingdom that he will destroy the people of God, and that's you and I. Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't have any doubt about that. And what amazes me is this next verse. And through his policy also, he shall cause craft to prosper. And policy is the word sekel, S-E-K-E-L. It means intelligence. It means this guy's smart. It doesn't mean necessarily a high IQ. It means he can polish up the world and get what he wants. And he'll cause craft, mirmah, M-I-R-M-A-H, or deception, M-I-R-M-A-H, deceit or fraud or guile or treachery to prosper. And I keep saying, boy, this sure does sound like Bill Clinton to me. I have never seen a man be so unethical and immoral, and the world loves him regardless. I mean, they love that man. He's one of the most popular presidents who ever lived, probably even excelling above John Kennedy. I mean, the world loves him. And what's amazing is that I heard somebody say, well, we don't care what he does. What he does with his wife doesn't necessarily mean what he'll do to his nation. We just want to know he's honorable toward his nation. A man will cheat on his wife. He'll certainly lie to his nation, won't he? Golly. And he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the Prince of Princes. That's Jesus, isn't it? Prince of Peace. Well, that's where he's attacking the church, isn't he? But he shall be broken without hand. The writers say that means without any strength. He'll be broken. I got some notes in my old Bible. Let me see if I can. But I remember it's talking about he'll have no strength to survive when God... if he comes up against Jesus, and the way you attack Jesus, you don't go shooting missiles up into the sky. You attack Jesus by attacking his wife, the church. No, I didn't have the notes in there, I thought. And the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. I guess so. Whew. He's been talking to Gabriel in person, and Gabriel said, sit up here. And afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but nobody understood it. God explained it to me. Whew. Isn't that something? Now what we're going to do we have any time, Mike? Let's just back up over here. I'm going to have to come back. Now if you go back to verse 23 of chapter 7. Thus, he said, the one who's explaining to Daniel, the one, up in verse 16, which is surely Gabriel. Verse 23, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms. That's Rome, the one with iron teeth, remember? And he's explaining to him about that first vision. And shall devour the whole earth. All the earth was made drunk with the wine of the fornication of that woman. And that's Babylon or Romanism. It's more than Roman Catholicism. It is self, or let us make its name. It's worshiping sin. It's actually turning the God of this world and making it sin. It's actually taking God and making the God of everybody sin, because that's the tree. That's let us make us a name. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. Now, he already has... This is an imperfect verb, so that means it's an action that has been taken, it's continued to be taken. So the 10 horns shall continue to arise and give strength to the beast, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and it shall subdue 3 kings, or Babylon, Persia, Greece, and this is Rome subduing them. And it shall speak, not he, it shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. This is war against the saints, isn't it? Yes. It's the same thing as you see up in, let me see. Well, let me continue reading. I don't want to go into that. And think, now, here, all right. And it shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. Whose times and laws are going to be changed? God's. If Isaiah the 5th chapter says the time will come when men will call good evil and evil good. It's respectable to be a homosexual and have a homosexual marriage and have a homosexual partner, and that's an alternate lifestyle now. But it's not respectable to be a real hard-line biblical believer, preacher, calling down the world. Now men are they're putting bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter and good for evil and evil for good. And they're calling good evil and evil good. They're changing times and laws. They're changing the law of God, and we could spend all night long on that, couldn't we? And they shall be given into his hand. The saints will be given into the hand, not only of the beast, but of this little horn that shall attack the saints until a time and times and dividing of times. And I'll come back to that next week because that's a long study. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it until the end. This beast system will be taken down. That'll be the end of time. You're jumping to the end of time again. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. There you are, back to Israel, eternal Israel, God's Israel, the church, spiritual Jews of the heart, whose kingdom is everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey the everlasting kingdom, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much trouble me. I guess so. That word cogitation means to mull something over and think on it. And my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. Do you think Daniel understood all this stuff? No. All of this was going to happen after he's living during the Babylonian Empire, because he interpreted dreams for Nebuchadnezzar, and he interpreted dreams for Darius, and Darius really loved Daniel. And Darius started reigning in 522 BC, and Daniel is giving the 70 weeks of Daniel about 520. So Persia's got to rise up years later after that. And then Rome, the beast with iron teeth, has to rise up. So how's Daniel going to know what Rome is? He's not, is he? You and I can see things that Daniel couldn't see because hindsight is certainly 20/20, isn't it?
He prophesied Jesus is coming too.
Yeah. Daniel was probably, this is messing with his brain. You're showing me this vision. Then God says, well, if you think that's something, I'm going to send this angel to touch you on the shoulder. Say, hey, stand up there. I'm out of time. And it's the only way you can understand things like the 7th and 8th chapters, read them together. And they blend. And you can see the blending of them. Well, let's pray. Father, we thank you for these truths. Help unravel this picture for us. Lord, it's so overwhelming to me. Sometimes I don't know how to explain it. Let me see it more and more clear every day, so we can see that we're coming down to the end of all things. Don't know when it's going to be, Lord, but we trust that you'll come back and do what you said one day. Thank you for truth. Lead us to your elect. Lord, we pray for the weak that's associated with grace and truth, the weak elect. Give them strength. Teach them to grow. Teach them to study. And Lord, teach me how to teach them. And open up many doors for this message if it's according to your mercy, and we'll give you the praise for all things. In Christ's name, amen. Things.
Did you know that Bill Clinton was talking about changing the regulation about how many terms a person can serve?
Oh yeah, he tried to get him to let him run again.
But if he gets his wife in an office, she'll probably get that enacted. So
No, I think what'll happen, Bill wants to be president. He wants to be Secretary General of the United Nations. That's what he wants. That's where, if that happens, woo-wee.
I was wondering what his angle was.
He actually said he'd like to be Secretary General of the United Nations. How's that something to scare you?
Point of power.
Whew.
Prepared for
I tell you, it's heavy stuff. That's heavy duty there. I don't know how to